The harem of the Ottoman Sultan is a place where hundreds of young girls, one more beautiful than the other, languish in anticipation of Halvet with the Padishah. But only a few managed to get to the Sultan's bed, and as a rule it was only those beauties who liked Valida Sultan. It was she and the Chief Eunuch who chose a companion for a sweet night with the Lord. During these weary days of waiting, no one removed from the concubine the obligation to observe the rules of the harem, including those relating to hygiene, sleep, clothing and beauty. It was always necessary to be on the alert, and suddenly now is the day when the dream will turn into reality. How was the life of the concubine of the Ottoman palace arranged? What did they eat and drink? What were you wearing? What conditions did the concubines have for sleep, personal hygiene, and how did they experience these days? What were the concubines sick in the harem of the Padishah and how often did they die? What diseases did the girls suffer from and why could Valide send them to an improvised prison? In the TV series, The Magnificent Century, every time a concubine was preparing for a night with the Sultan, she urgently went to the Hamam. And how were things really going with the water procedures in the harem? Is it really true that the Hamam for the slave was only on holidays? The tradition of the bath in the Ottoman harem. A Hamam, or a bathhouse in our language, is a place that was visited once a week. This water procedure was given the whole day. The girls went to the bath in the morning and returned in the evening. In addition to washing, all kinds of beauty treatments were carried out there, facial and body massage, applying useful masks to hair, epilation, manicure, skin whitening and other simple activities. Therefore, of course, if the concubine was lucky enough to go to the Sultan's Halvet, then she did not go to the bath according to schedule. In addition to all kinds of procedures, the Hamam was a place of gossip and various cheerful communication. The Hamam in the harem was not alone, as you understand. Valide, for example, had a separate bathhouse and, of course, she did not go to a public one, let's call it that. The Sultan also had his own Hamam. In the Hamam of the harem, the water was not dirty, it flowed from the tap, which is certainly the merit of Sinan, and I am now talking about the bath in Topkapi. Despite the availability of water, it was necessary to use it sparingly, since it was not easy to extract water and maintain the sewage system. From that, in the harem, the water was poured into separate containers, and from there, special dishes, like a round salad bowl, were used by girls. It was shown in the series and it's true. Of course, there was both cold and hot water in the bath, heated separately. Hamam soap was brewed in the Ottoman Empire itself. Fruity and flavored, which can be considered the first example of modern perfumery soap, was considered a favorite subject of the entire harem. Traditionally, soap with olive oil was used, but expensive and rare musky soap was given by the nobility to the Sultan himself. Of course, in a Hamam, a slave must devote so much time to the application of various scents so that the fragrance remains on her body and hair all week. From that, incense was burned in the Hamam, rose water was dipped and essential oils were used. How many baths were there in Topkapi? There were plenty of bathing spots in the palace. The main ones were 5, the Sultan's bath, Valide, for favorites, for concubines, the hospital had its own Hamam. How did the concubines sleep and eat in the Sultan's harem? The Topkapi Palace complex is simply huge. In fact, it is the area of one small village, where there is everything from schools and hospitals to private houses and administrative buildings. However, the harem is a separate block of the residential complex of the palace, consisting of many apartments, figuratively speaking. In different centuries, concubines lived in the harem. Their number depended on the ambitions of the ruling sultan and ranged from 100 to 1,000 or more. But, not all of them led a full life and rejoiced, only a small part lived in separate rooms, while the rest slept, ate and spent their days all in one room, large as a huge hall. It looks like what was shown in the series. Why did all the slaves of the palace live in the same room? Was it really impossible to settle them in 2s, 3s? Why such a dormitory as in a barrack? The fact is that there could be no question of any central heating system. Yes, there was water. But the huge rooms and halls of the palace were heated by small fireplaces. Therefore, keeping all the girls of the harem in one place was beneficial, both in terms of heating and total control over what they do. After all, we all know how strict the rules were. Eunuchs monitored their observance. And imagine a crowd of girls from 14 to 25 years old, approximately, who in fact are still children. It was strictly forbidden to violate the rules of the harem, and a eunuch, if he did not keep track of any prankster, could lose his head. What were the inconsolable virgins fed with? The palace kitchen was very large. There they cooked food for the Sultan, Valide Sultan, Shahzaid and the Sultan's daughters, favorites and slaves from the harem. From the documents on the expenses for the maintenance of the kitchen and food, one can judge what the Sultan's concubines ate and drank in the harem. Topkapi cuisine is the highest culinary art. After all, slaves served in the kitchen, and they were brought from all over the world. Of course, there was traditional food, but this does not mean that the chefs could not experiment. I am sure that the pilaf of the Ottoman Sultan was very different from the traditional pilaf that is served now. However, the Sultan, the Walid and the children of the Padishah could afford to eat exquisitely. Ordinary concubines in the harem ate a rather modest meal, but did not sit on water and bread. Their diet was quite diverse, where the benefits, the number of calories and the frequency of meals were taken into account. Mostly it was dairy products, vegetables, fruits, rice. Pawala and other sweets were distributed in the harem only on special occasions. Well, everything is as shown in the TV series Magnificent Century. Clothing and jewelry of the concubines of the Ottoman harem. There can be no question of any cleavage, open shoulders. The girls wore bloomers, and over their shoulders they wore something like a tunic, up to the knees. The slaves in the harem received wages, and the money was spent on cosmetics, jewelry and fabrics. Basically, for everyday wear, simple clothes made of inexpensive raw materials were used, and on holidays concubines wore the most exquisite outfits and jewelry. Important, for clothes, not only concubines, but also all residents of the palace, was the color of the fabric and patterns. Basically, all shades of red and green were used. The drawings could also be embroidered by hand. Flower patterns were most appreciated: tulips, carnations, plum twigs, roses. The head should always be covered. She wore bandanas, as we would say now, turbans and any other round headdresses with carved cone-shaped shapes on their heads, with very fine trimmed drapery. And the young concubines braided thin braids with pearls and blue beads, and tied them with ribbons. As jewelry, the slaves wore gold necklaces, bracelets, rings made of many precious stones and long earrings. A small guide to intimate places, menstruation in the harem. First about superstitions. Throughout history, superstitious people regarding menstruation believed that menstrual blood could harm living or inanimate beings. It was believed that a menstrual woman was dirty. Women were ousted from public life for this period. The divine scriptures, which were distorted by people over time, called maharif, contained such information. A woman with menstruation will be considered dirty for 7 days. During menstruation, everything she slept on or sat on will be considered dirty. Whoever touches her bed, washes her clothes, will be considered dirty. Anyone who touches any objects on her bed or on what she is sitting on will be considered dirty. Pollution from a menstrual woman is also transmitted to the man who sleeps with her. A man remains dirty for 7 days, and every bed in which he sleeps is considered dirty. It is safe to assume that knowing these superstitions that lived in those centuries, a concubine with menstruation was probably placed in the infirmary, without the right to visit the Hamam, eat from common dishes and sleep among other women of the harem. Diseases and death of concubines. I think it's easy to guess, knowing the history, what diseases most of the concubines of the Ottoman harem suffered from and from what these unfortunate girls died more often. But you cannot guess, but read the archives of the palace. So, firstly, the terrible cold, dampness and mold of the palace caused such frequent diseases as tuberculosis. Also, it was often toxic intoxication with mold and fungus spores. Allergies, rheumatism, dermatosis are also frequent guests of the harem. Of course, slaves did not die from all these diseases. Something could be cured, some diseases became chronic and led to death much later. For example, Harem could have died from one of these diseases, because we know that the cause of her death has not been established. Well, it is necessary to take into account the fact that almost none of the women of the Ottoman Empire living in a palace or even in palaces survived the 60-year mark. Mahidevran alone, having gone to Bursa for fresh air, lived for 82 long years. Secondly, the plague epidemic did not want to leave the Ottoman Empire for centuries, and therefore, death from the plague was not such a rare phenomenon among slaves. Thirdly, life in a harem will not seem like paradise. The idea that the girls in it led a sweet life, sang, ate, had fun, is not entirely true. Not everyone wanted to marry Pasha in 9 years and successfully arrange their life in this way. Most preferred to become the Sultan's favorite, give birth to Shahzaid and achieve the status of Valide Sultan. They lied, stole, and killed their rivals. But why? After all, most of the sultans were far from handsome, but just the opposite. Some of them had bad habits that were detrimental to life, while others generally suffered from various forms of schizophrenia. For example, Sultan Ibrahim, nicknamed Mad. But in all ages, the behavior of concubines was the same. I think we will never understand this. Why did young and beautiful girls need it? After all, most of them, seeking to occupy a position near the Sultan, did not even care about the fate of their own children. But, this is a completely different story. And that's it for today. Don't miss the main thing, subscribe to our channel and click on the bell to not miss new stories. Take care of yourself and don't be sad, all the best.